Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week of the Wealth Cafe, and we are in for a very special coffee conversation. I am joined today by Milka Milliance, and she is an incredible woman, and we are going to dive all into her story and expertise today. And she is I have just so many great things to say about her and the company that she has built and transitioning into corporate. To give you a little background on her, she empowers leaders to build unstoppable teams with human-centered and innovative actionable strategies for team development, leadership growth, and unforgettable retreats that transform, inspire, and elevate teams. Milka, welcome today. We are so excited to have you here.
Hi, Caroline. I'm really happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I'm excited to just chat with you and to also share with your community some of the things I'm working on.
And it's also interesting too, you didn't always start out in this world, which I think is incredible. You actually started out on the corporate side of things, which I want to start there when it comes to your story because we have so many women in this community who listen to the show who are on the corporate side of things. So give us where your background, how you started in the corporate
Yeah.
world, give us the whole background on everything.
Actually, it's funny you should say that because I find that pivoting has probably been one of the more central aspects of my career trajectory for the last 20 years. Because my first job, well, it was an internship, but it was at ABC News in New York. And so I did start in corporate. I did that for about 2 years. It was like an after-school paid internship and the first step I had to corporate America. And then I realized after I traveled abroad, that I really wanted to do international development work. And so I pivoted to that right after school, and I did that for several years. I was working in international development, so I got to travel internationally, doing some very interesting work in the philanthropy space. And then I went to graduate school and then pivoted again to work in management consulting, which I did for about 10 years before I then pivoted again about another which I pivoted out of and into working more independently 10 years ago. And so there's been a lot of shifts in my career. And more recently, I've started multiple companies, started also closed and also sold. And more recently, I actually am starting the venture that is so near and dear to my heart and something that I sometimes wish I had started 10 years ago, which is basically organizing retreats and working with teams and executives to bring more inspiration, more delight, more learning, more growth, more connection to them in how they work with their teams. Because right now, we know that burnout is at an all-time high. And every day I'm inundated with news of just what's happening in the workplace. And I think we can do better. And I think this is an opportunity for all of us to really take a step back whatever role that we're in. Like, how do we contribute to making the workplace a making the workplace a place where there's more belonging, there's also more connection, but also people don't feel that they're literally working themselves to death.
Yeah. And it's something that, we hear time and time again to the point where we kind of laugh because, burnout, we're like, oh yeah, I'm burnt out. I'm this, that, and the other thing, but it's serious, right? And we have seen, especially too, me being in the finance world, we literally have seen people die from it,
Yeah.
unfortunately, especially, investment bankers and it's happening across other industries. I just see that news on the forefront more because of the industry I work in is we think it's a joke, but the lasting health effects, like health is wealth, and we forget that time and time again.
100% health is wealth. Something that I don't talk about this often, because I have my own history with burnout, but more recently, I had a situation in my family, actually, my husband, he had a stroke at 41 last August, and it was from work burnout. The His supervisor would literally call him at all hours of the morning, all hours of the night. It was absurd and crazy. And I remember for a while, thinking and talking to him, I'm like, I'm really concerned.
Yeah.
And because I was like, this is just not normal. The amount of, the just how all your boundaries are constantly being walked all over by your supervisor and also your company. And then, needless to say, he actually ended up going to the hospital because he had a stroke at a very young age, which who could expect that from somebody who's 41 years old? And so it's something that I don't think we take it seriously enough. He spent 10 days in the hospital. This happened last September. And it was a rude awakening for him. And for me, a further reminder and really the reason why I decided this is exactly what I want to do. So this is my why. My husband had a stroke, and myself, I had a series of experiences 10 years ago that made me step out of corporate America because I was, yeah, I was on my way
Yeah.
to probably having a similar experience.
First of all, I'm so sorry that happened to, in your family and to your husband, but I appreciate you sharing that because we all think, oh my goodness, it'll never be us, it'll never be our family. You hear about these stories time and time again, and then it happens and you sit there and you go, oh, and it's a lot of times there are these moments that you can't come back from, and we
Yeah.
and we realize like it's horrible that we then have to get to those points, right? And that's like the barriers that we have to put on it. And you know thankful that you're doing the work that you're doing. We'll dive more into everything that you're doing
Yeah.
with the retreats in shortly, but there is the balance that we can have and the focus that we can drive and do really incredible work, and we can also, I believe that we can really enjoy life incredibly and we can do really incredible things in the workplace. Like we can do both of those and we can
Mhm.
navigate and have that kind of boundary and focus and do both.
Yeah.
It takes communication, it takes work, it takes effort, right? And time away to recharge, to
Yeah.
come back better.
Yeah, it takes a lot of intentionality and planning.
Yes.
And I think that's where I know I've been guilty of this. It's something that I do this work because I know I also struggle with not overworking myself, right? I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner. So I
Mhm.
know that some days I'll work 12, 14 hours and I'm like, okay, Mocha, you can't, you know that this is not sustainable. And how do you constantly pull back from yourself and also from your own proclivities and behaviors and that you've been socialized, that you've learned. This is the expectation when you are in a position of power or you're in a position where there's a lot that's expected of you. So I'm saying this to people so that people, we all understand that it's not that some of us can go off and just be in constant place of leisure. No, it's how do you create the spaciousness for yourself? How do you create the spaciousness for your family and also the teams that you're working with so that you have the boundaries and you respect them and then you model them for yourself, for others, so that they actually are mindful that, hey, you know what? I'm not going to respond to that email at 10 o'clock. And I'm also not going to send out an email at 10 o'clock because somebody's going to have the expectation that they need to respond to it, right? How can we be more mindful of that for ourselves?
I also, something that I've started to do is because there is seasonality to things that we do, right? Especially like in a lot of the work that I do personally, like December 21st for me is a real deadline. I can't change that. So between
Yeah.
for me, like Thanksgiving to Christmas is very busy. And you talked about those 12 to 14-hour days. Like I can't change it during that time. So my
Mhm.
intentionality between Christmas and New Year's, me and my admin and my team and anyone around me, we are off between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
We are
Need the downtime.
recharging.
Yeah.
Right. And we know that like that is a hard boundary because we need to come back in the new year refreshed. But like
Mhm.
there is the then that intentionality that you talked about of like we know this is a season we can't change. How do we then recover afterwards to be on that beach to, sip a pina colada or, an iced tea to come back afterwards and say, okay, we worked really hard, we recharged really hard
Yeah.
and recovered. Now how do we pace ourselves coming back into a traditional season of that
Yeah.
time frame?
It's the planning. And to your point, I think it's also, I'm holding the space that we have people who are entrepreneurs, they have more control of their schedules, right? And so when you think about how do you plan around that, so that was a great point. I'm the same for the last 7 or 8 years. The business closes as of December 22nd, December 22nd, 23rd, until after the new year. So usually we don't open until January 2nd or 3rd, just be able to spend time with family. I'm like, there's really not enough going on to
Yeah.
merit, right? So that's just, there's always closure. And so and then also there's not a lot of travel. So it's really time to just reground, sleep in, just nurture yourself. And then thinking about throughout the year, like when do you know there are seasons that it's really, there's not a lot going on. So how do you plan around that? And already put it on your calendar. And also encourage your team, right, to do the same. And to balance that. And for people who are in corporate spaces where you may not have as much control, like what can you do for yourself and also for your team ahead of time? Like you should start thinking about if you want to do a gathering, you want to bring your team together, you should start planning it at least, the very least 3 months in advance, ideally at least 6 months in advance to make it really worthwhile and not something you do last minute and then it just being ends up being just what are we doing here, right? And so I do think that um, anytime you're thinking about what it means to retreat, what it means to step back, already planning that into your workflow, how you work, allows you to be a lot more balanced and to keep yourself more even keeled throughout your day, weeks, months, and also the year.
Yeah. So let's unpack the whole retreat space. Number one, I want to start with how did you get into the retreat space in your
Yeah.
own life and in your own journey?
Yeah, it's been a journey. So about 10 years ago, I was working as a consultant in New York City, traveling all over the world as a management consultant. And basically, after constantly, like literally sometimes traveling for weeks on at a time and living out of my suitcase, I got a medical diagnosis. And my doctor told me I need to slow down. And I didn't take it seriously and I just kept on going. And then about a few weeks later, I essentially had three near-death experiences in 1 week. Um, 3 in 1 week. And mind you, like this is like a 5 day work week. And so I was so out of sorts by the third time. I was literally driving off an exit. I was living in Queens at the time. And I was and I my boss called me and he was always calling me at odd hours of the day. And I was trying to pick up the phone and the cell phone fell. And if my phone literally fell the front of the seat, the passenger seat, and I was trying to get it as I'm pulling out the exit. I don't know what was going through my mind. I wasn't thinking. As I tried to reach down, the car swerved and I almost drove right into an exit barrier. And fortunately for me, the person driving next to me was much more aware of what was going on. And then they were able to pull over to the next lane. So literally within seconds of crashing into the exit, I managed to swerve the car, and the car was actually scratched as well. And I remember after that happened, I pulled out of the exit, parked the car in a corner, and I lost it. I started crying and I was like, what am I doing? And I remember what the doctor said to me. And I was like, if I keep going like this, I'm going to die.
Right.
And I resigned from my job. I was working at a big four consulting firm. I resigned from my job the following week. And I knew at the moment that I needed to just step away. And a friend of mine mentioned, you really should just unplug, get out of the city, go somewhere. And then I started doing some research and I found a retreat center in upstate New York. And that's where I went. And I found myself again while I was there. And I feel like I got my life back. And strangely enough, I had an opportunity to go right back into corporate. Um, and I chose not to because it would have been either the retreat or going into another similar type of corporate job within that 2 week period. So I chose to go on the retreat and to stay there. And it changed the course of my life because for the first time, I could just breathe. I could just eat the healthy food that I needed to eat, go on long walks, do yoga, meditate.
Not
And
lunch
I
for your
left.
phone.
Right, exactly. And I didn't even have a phone I didn't even bring my phone with me. And there was no TV in the cottage where I was staying. There was no, like, I was completely disconnected. And it was after that experience I realized like I needed to do this on a regular basis.
Mm.
And ever since, every year I go on a retreat. And I also decided that it's something that I need to find a way to integrate into my work. And more recently, in the last few years, I started dabbling into it, doing retreats more with clients. Every time there was an opportunity to bring people together, especially post-pandemic, I would always offer that to them, and they were always excited about it. And so last year, I did about 4 different retreats with clients. And when I realized, you know what, this is really where I want to focus. And so I pivoted and created Symmetra's team experiences. where the primary focus is team gathering. So whether it's team offsites, team retreats, but the idea is to basically bring teams together, whether it's your department, whether it's your small team or the larger organization, create space for more connection, create space also for growth and for learning and for fun and relaxation, and find a way to do it where you're not in your normal, regular office space or at home. And it's been something during the pandemic, like post-pandemic, with so many teams being hybrid as well as remote, it's been a great opportunity to really create more space to come together once or twice a year. So it's been something that I've loved being able to work with teams to actually bring them together. And I'm looking forward to this being a paradigm shift in how we do work. Because my thing is, look, a lot of companies are not paying for the office spaces they used to pay for
Yeah.
before, right? So that's money back on their balance sheet. So they actually now can reinvest only like a fraction of what they were paying for a lease into investing and bringing their teams together once or twice a year at the very least.
And I think that's the interesting point is, especially too, with teams that are now spread out across the country, even sometimes around the globe,
Oh, yeah.
it's more important than ever to have that in-person moment. Like I just think, I love the ability to have hybrid work. I think it's awesome to give
Yeah.
people that flexibility, but there are just certain moments that you can't replace that in-person
Yeah.
energy. Even if it's just for a weekend, a long weekend, to take that time
Yes.
to be together. We do it with, we have several advisors. We'll all come together about twice a year, three times a year
Mhm.
now. And when we do, it's like it's those little moments and those conversations that you have off in the corner with somebody, or that don't normally happen on Zoom,
Yeah.
or when you're doing some of those like different experiences, whether it's you're
Mhm.
off site somewhere and you're doing that activity, and you'll have those memories forever.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, and we can talk about this a little bit if you want to. There's so much, I see this too as a business owner. There's so much
Mhm.
research that happens about why people leave companies and leave teams. And it's not usually because of money, it's because of culture and because of how they feel.
Yeah.
And time again, like when clients come to me and they're like, yeah, my salary's decent. And I'm like, okay, so like, what's the issue?
What's
And
the
they're
issue? Yeah.
like, it's always people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's often, you know, people don't feel like they're being recognized or they feel like they're being undervalued or they're not effectively they feel that they're not seen. That perhaps they feel invisible. And so and companies sadly often believe, oh, we'll just throw money. That well, most companies, the majority of companies, the way they do business, there's a problem. We wait last minute to fix it and we throw a lot of money at it, right? And sometimes a lot of these challenges, these things could have already been prevented if more intentionality and more time was dedicated to actually preventing, your good people from leaving,
Mhm.
right? And so creating a culture, creating a team environment where there is people can bond, like there's the relationships have depth, right? Especially with everything with so much being virtual now, you lose a lot of the moments you would have had before when you were interacting. And quite frankly, look, one of the reasons I know for sure for me and so many of us why we prefer hybrid, although a lot of companies have a hard time realizing this is think about the time you get back from the long commutes, right? The hour and a half drive or hour drive to work each way, 2.5 hours. That's like, 10 hours of your week that you lose just to commute to get to work. And so when you take those things away, what's also happening is because of that, I know this happens, like you end up working longer, right? So that's part of how the burnout happens, like this nonstop, even when you are not driving to a particular location, you're still now you're waking up still at the same time, but you start working at 8 o'clock if you're gonna instead of working at 9 o'clock, right? And so the so the hours, the days are even longer. So and I this morning I saw something on LinkedIn of how there was a report that Microsoft put out on just it tracking um, just the amount of meetings that are happening after work hours, and they're finding a huge percentage, and it was really out of control of meetings. I believe 30 or 40% are
Mhm.
actually happening after 8 o'clock at night, not
That's
after
not
five
after
or
work
six.
hours. That's my bedtime.
Exactly. 8 p.m. Meetings are being, they're finding a lot of meetings are happening at 8 p.m. And so all this other data that they're tracking to see how so much of what's happening in the workplace are some of the maybe some of the boundaries that were created when we were like during the pandemic, we were working hybrid or virtually. And now that people, a lot of people have gone back into the office, unfortunately, you still have situations where that it's so blurred now, the line between, um, you know, when you're at your working hours and your home hours,
Mhm.
so that now they're calling it like the infinite work schedule, where you're
Right.
literally, I mean, that's insane, where you're always working, you're always on, and but technically you're really only getting paid 8 hours a day, but you're now working 10, 12, 13 hours a day.
Yeah. And especially true with different time zones, like 8 o'clock, that's a prime time because in California,
Five.
that's great for working parents because now you've had the kids have gone to bed. You can
Hmm.
hop back on now with the people who are,
Hmm.
Pacific Coast
Yeah.
time. And so, and then you have Europe, or, Europe's not actually awake
It's
yet,
like
but
2 o'clock in the morning. Or-
I was going to say Europe,
yeah.
but I'm doing the math. And
Yeah. Going east. I'm sorry if you're going west. Yes.
yes, you keep going.
Yeah.
Asia Pacific, you're
Yeah.
keep going. It
Indonesia.
works.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, I get it, but it's hard because you're mentally still in work mode. Even if you
All
came
the time.
home, like picked kids up from school, and I love the flexibility. I think like I'm
Yeah.
all for it. From the mental side though, you're still working, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not turned off. And
Yeah.
it is that like especially too, I do a lot of conversations with women and also research in terms of like women and our shifting as we always end up being the default parent, especially with kids, who they
Yes.
call for everything. And so it's like now you've done the whole bedtime routine, you've made lunches, you've done everything, and then now you're shifting back to work. And that is exhausting and adds even more to that burnout. And so when you are building these retreats,
Hmm.
what is your focus on in terms of my thought is, question is two part.
Hmm.
What are you focused on in terms of team building and also in terms of people being able to actually refresh and it not feel like another, because I've gone on a lot of work trips where it's like, great, now I'm even more exhausted because
Yeah.
I just went away for more work travel. How do
Yeah.
you balance that on a retreat?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I'm going to start with the first one. So I have a retreat team experience company where I'm not a big fan of a lot of some team building activities that are just too superficial or just too prescriptive. And so my perspective is find moments for inspiration and connecting and also learning. So if you're going to create any sort of team building, whether it's scenarios, opportunity, make it something that either that one connects back to, it could connect back to something that's important to your organization. So let's say your organization is really big on it's be eco-friendly, or there's something very specific, or sustainability very specific, or mindfulness and health. Find something that energizes folks, right? Where there's still, it either energizes or relaxes people. So find opportunities to create programming whether you might want to integrate something like yoga and wellness, or um, meditation. Maybe that's something you might want to integrate. Or it could be like, you know what, if you're a team that's more competitive, create a challenge if people want that level of interactivity. But I would say definitely take some time to survey your team to understand what they want. Don't just prescribe what their 2 or 3 days going to look like. Try to figure out, okay, what do people want? Do people want to rest? Do people want to have more rest and relaxation? Do they want to be more active? Do they want more time to connect? And then when you find a good balance based on what you learned from your team, then you can think about, okay, how do I also use the environment that I'm in? So if let's say all you have is the budget to do a day retreat, like just one day, for your team and you can't travel too far, find like in your own city, your own environment, find opportunities, whether it's for some people it might be like they want to do something like a scavenger hunt in their time, but that's what they want to do,
Mhm.
right? Because they want to be more energized and they want that level of connection and fun. You can do something like that and connect it to something that's larger for your team. Like, let's say for your team, you want to make sure they know how to do better problem solving. So that's a great way to do that. So gamify it and make it fun, right? So that's one way to like, okay, my team needs to work on how to make decisions and problem solving. Let's do something like a scavenger hunt. Let's do a challenge to see like how do we get them to both have fun, connect, but this is a bigger thing our team is struggling with, the bigger pain point that we want to focus on. So that's one way to think about how do you use your environment, how do you use the pain points or needs of your team, and also first and foremost, the most important, understand what your team is looking for. Don't just propose something that you might think is great, but other people they're like, well, yeah, that's not how I wanted to spend my time. So really take the time to understand first what it is that you want. Everyone wants to get out of it, knowing that you're never going to hit the mark 100% for everyone because people have different needs. But if you can get close enough to meet a variety of needs, then people will be sufficiently happy.
I love that. I
Your
love that.
second question, can you remind me of your second question?
Yes, I have to remind myself too. For- um, First we were talking about the
Rebuilding.
balancing kind of the relaxation versus the I was deep diving into my in my own head. I'm like, yep, that makes sense. And thinking of things in my own city that teams can do and putting it in my own head. So I got lost in the
Mhm.
question. But I think you answered that so well that I'm gonna check it off that you answered both parts. Does that count?
Okay. I think the second was important though. Um, it was about, okay, I gotta get,
We
let's
can
move
always
on.
we can edit this. It's okay.
Okay.
Um, what was my second part?
I'm usually pretty good at this stuff. I'm remembering.
Your answer was so good that in my own head I was like, oh, it's such a good idea. Like, here's what I could do. Here was like,
Yeah. It's okay. We can continue. Like, it'll probably come back at some point.
okay.
Okay.
Um,
Well, maybe I can speak to something else actually as well that I wanted to talk about. It's how to actually get the support that you need to even do these retreats, right? So
yeah.
if we think about people who don't have their own businesses, they're working for a company and they need to make the case.
Yes.
And I think sometimes there's a perception that the funding is not there, but I always challenge that. You'd be surprised. There are ways you can get creative. So I'll give you an example. Some companies individually there are budgets, right? Each person may have. I remember when I was working at KPMG, like I think we had like a $2,500 budget for learning and development or something like that. And so you can get creative if you have a team as a manager where you can either think about, okay, how do we pool our funds together? Let's say we decide, okay, this year we really need to do something team specific. Like, how do we pool our money, our funds together and decide, okay, we're gonna like all allocate our individual personal learning development budget to do something specific together. That's one option but everybody has to be in agreement because if somebody wants to do something very different with their with
Mm,
their learning and development budget, then that's not fair to them. Another option to get even more support is to make the case, make the business case to why this is important for your team. So what I find with some executives, if they're taking on a new team, a new opportunity, and let's say this is a team they've inherited, retreats, this is a perfect opportunity to create more alignment with your team, right? Because you want to be successful, the company wants to be successful, and sometimes the difference between failure and your success with making this quick pivot is you need to get everybody together who normally, especially if your team is hybrid, they don't interact with each other often. You need to get them together for 2 or 3 days to strategize, to align, to come together and to build an action plan. So you know what, this is our plan for the next year or the next 2 years. Now, I think I'd be remiss if you just jump into something, you don't really take the time to get to know your team, to understand what motivates your direct reports, then you're setting yourself up really for to not be as successful as you could be because you're basically in a situation where you're navigating a ship, but you don't really know like you don't really understand, like you don't really know your crew that well. You also don't understand the all the parts that you're probably dealing with and the environment that you might be navigating your ship in as well. So it is something that I do think that making the case by first, again, I'm a big believer in always you start by surveying your team, understand what's going on. Well, if you can't survey, then do interviews and try to like unearth like what are the biggest pain points, what are the biggest areas you're like, you know what, if we're able to get together, we can solve for something very specific. Oftentimes that is a more certain way of getting funding for these types of retreats and saying, "Oh, my team's burnt out." That may be harder, unfortunately, unless your team prioritizes health and wellness, unless your company prioritizes health and wellness.
Mhm.
The other approach is to use a business case approach to, hey, you know what? If we are able to invest X amount of funds into this, this is the ROI that we will get because we will meet these goals, these metrics, and whatever it is that my team is working on. And then you find a way along the way to make sure that whatever retreat you create, it meets as many different needs as possible. So your executives are happy, your team is happy, and you're happy, and then you're creating a greater path to your own success.
Right. And you're able to come together and it's so interesting. And this is true whether you are in a corporate team, you have your own business. It is sometimes taking that step back, stepping out of the office and almost like realigning to fit and taking that time. I love what you said about, either one-on-one interviewing or polling the group or whatever it might be, figuring out what is a problem. Are we tired? Do we need to refresh? Do we need to just have our annual reset? What is it that we need to do? Take that step back so you can come back in better than ever. And
Yeah,
you know, in terms of that burnout and that fatigue, so much of the old adage has been like push through, keep going, just push through the cog. And it is so true. And I've seen it in my own life time and time again. When you take that step back, even if it's for a day or two, or like this morning, you know what? I was like, I'm really feeling it, especially, with all the rain we've had in New Jersey. I was like, I'm going to take a walk for, 30 minutes this morning and I'm going to just step away. And you come back so much better and refreshed in that time. It resets everything. And so
yeah.
we try to push through, but sometimes it's taking that step back to take 10 steps forward.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, every team that I've been on during the last 10 years, that's been a critical aspect of how, because or every team has been hybrid,
Mhm.
has been remote. And so twice a year, we've always made it a priority to meet. And sometimes if you're a small company, um, a great way to do it, and to be mindful also of your own, the cash for you, when you're a small business, your cash flow is always an issue. Just being mindful of your expenses is if your team, let's say your team is going to deliver something to a client, and two or three of you, you're already going to be in the same city, you're going to be in the same area, you can add 2 days on the back end, right? You add 2 days on the back end of your trip, your business trip for the client, and client is actually paying for the airfare. You add 2 days and you extend your trip. As long as whatever commitments you have to them, you still keep them, and then your team, and then you can fly in maybe what additional people if need be, and then you on your own, your own dime, you rent an Airbnb or Verbo, and you just find a way to actually create 2 or 3 days for your team to meet. So that's also another way when you're a small business owner to make sure like you can integrate it into the way you're already working anyway.
I love it. I love it. This has been such an amazing conversation. I like to end every coffee conversation with a
Mhm.
question.
Okay,
What is one thing that you do every day that makes you feel wealthy?
that's a great question. I feel like I have two multiple different answers for that.
Give it to us.
That's a great one thing that makes me feel wealthy every day. This is so silly. I'm gonna
No,
show you.
they are some of the best answers. That's why I love to ask it. They're all,
Because my first react, because my brain, my logical reaction was, yeah, I check my stocks, I check my investments. But then again, I'm like, I got this nice little like tumbler. My name is on it. My business's logo is on it. And it says, say yes to new adventures. And it feels so luxurious to me. Like,
Yes. Yes. I love it. That is
yeah.
beautiful. And that's the whole thing of, we build beautiful businesses and careers and have this
Mhm.
money to do incredible things with it. So that's the whole drive behind the question. If people want to talk to you about your experience, your beautiful
Yes.
retreats, where is the best way to connect with you and talk more?
Sure. Definitely you can find me on LinkedIn. You can follow my LinkedIn page. Just put Symetra's Team Experiences, and you will find me on LinkedIn. Also, my email is info@Symetras, which is SIMETRAS.co. You can also email me or visit my website, symetras.co as well. And I imagine they'll be provided in the description. And so you can feel free to email me, find me on LinkedIn, or just reach out to me through my website. And I'm happy to chat. I'm happy to help you brainstorm if you have some ideas, or if this is an area where you're like, you know what, I would love to do something with my team this year. Help me get started. I'm happy to spend 20 to 30 minutes just strategizing what are the things that you can start doing to help get you there. And I'm happy to chat about that.
Awesome. And yes, of course, all of the information will be in the show notes so you can see it here. And please, Milka is a beautiful resource of knowledge of everything retreats and experiences. So make sure you take her up on that offer and really utilize doing something incredible for your team. The year isn't over, not even close to it. So you can still do something for this year. I will see everybody next time on the Wealth Cafe.